They were well-dressed, well-organized, and preyed on the well-to-do. When it came to robbing hotels, they had no reservations. The Hotel Pierre was their last and greatest caper. Each year, millions come to New York City to make a fortune or to spend one. And in 1970, one gang came here to steal one. While most of the city's wealth was socked away in banks and real estate, a small but surprisingly lucrative portion of it lay in the security boxes of New York's finest hotels. The robbers learned to mine this resource, turning hotel heists into a science. Most thieves targeted the upstairs guest rooms, but these criminals seldom left the lobby. The men, usually 2 or more, would sweep in late at night, hold the staff at gunpoint, and restrain them. Then they'd break open the security boxes one by one. They used surprise to their advantage. None of the victims got a good look at the culprits, or they were too startled to recall any details. Police had only a sketchy description to go by. White men in their 30s, dark hair, dressed for the occasion, one of them wearing a wig.
They were always well-dressed, especially in the good hotels. They would have to wear, according to the area and fit. They had to fit in place. So they would be wearing the proper clothing for that hotel.
They honed their skills while robbing more than 24 hotels over the year. Each time, they had successfully evaded police. There seemed to be no stopping them.
They were occurring with such frequency that the police department put together a particular unit to look into and guard against these hotel jewel robberies.
And yet, the crime wave was one of New York's best-kept secrets.
These hotels are first-class hotels. Their clientele are the upper crust, the upper echelon of society. It is not in their best interest to publicize or to assist in publicizing these kinds of incidences.
They frustrated the police, always seeming to be one step ahead, and growing bolder with each heist. On August 5th, 1970, they paid an early morning visit to the posh Regency Hotel. They subdued 15 people with handcuffs and tape with relative ease. The safety boxes presented more of a challenge. After an hour, they had cracked only 17 of them, but the thieves were not so easily discouraged. They commandeered a dolly from a window washer, beginning his early morning rounds. They removed some of the boxes and a small safe, rolling them to their getaway car. The boxes were found on Long Island a few days later.
I noticed this commotion going on, and
None of the 15 hostages could give a clear description of the criminals.
It was very dark.
Robbing security boxes was daring, but stealing the actual boxes was outrageous. The audacity of the crime earned it a mention in the New York Times crime sheet. It won a place in the gossip column, too. Elizabeth Taylor had checked into the Regency the night before. Fortunately, she kept her $2 million collection in her suite.
Regency was very important because that's the first one that they got front page notoriety on.
The notorious heist inspired the thieves to alter their modus operandi. 2 months after Elizabeth Taylor's visit to New York, Sophia Loren was seen on TV and around town promoting her latest film and wearing an enormous diamond. Loren became the next target. The plan swung into effect on Sunday, October 11th, 1970.
Oh, in for the night, Miss Loren.
Yes,
Once they were sure that Sophia Loren was in her suite at the Hampshire house, they donned their disguises and made their move. The time was 7:15 Sunday morning. As usual, the gang had planned it perfectly. At that hour, the hotel had a small staff on duty. They had no trouble taking the hotel.
Take me to Sophia Loren's room. Now. Shut up, get out. Where are the jewels? Where are the jewels? Where are the jewels? Where are they? Watch them. Plug them if they move. Don't move. Where are the jewels? Don't move.
In only a few minutes, the robbers had handcuffed the hotel employees, bagged the valuables, and walked out the door with an estimated $500,000 worth of uninsured jewels.
We knew that they were getting more daring. That's what it told us, that, instead of just hitting the boxes downstairs, they were going upstairs.
The thieves were targeting high-profile victims, but their style and technique hadn't changed. Police knew this was the work of the same gang. They'd likely try to fence the gems out of state, so the FBI joined forces with the police. The crooks felt the heat. They laid low for a full year.
They weren't going to be that brazen of going out there and hitting somebody right away. So they were dodging the FBI at the same time, and the local police from New York.
An informant told the FBI that the masterminds of the hotel capers were two men, a man named Bobby from Rochester and someone called Sammy the Arab. While agents tried to follow up on this scant information, the crime wave seemed to have ended. But in truth, the gang was planning its biggest heist of all.
They were always looking for the score of all scores, the big one, that they can retire on.
The Hotel Pierre, one of New York's finest addresses for luxury apartments and lavish guest suites. While many of its residents spent the winter abroad, its guest rooms were filled with visitors who came to New York for the festivities of the 1971 holiday season.
Okay, thank you.
Holiday parties, of course, require formal attire and one's best finery. Guests at the Pierre had little reason to doubt that their valuables were safe in the hotel's security boxes. The hotel robbers were planning a New Year's celebration of their own. At 4 a.m. on January 2nd, 1972, a limousine pulled up in front of the Hotel Pierre. It was an unremarkable event.
Good evening. We have reservations. Can you open up, please?
What's going on here? Shut up, you stupid! What are you doing? Shut up. Over there. Let's go. Come, take your toy. Don't even do it. Back up.
While the desk clerk was being captured, another robber headed to the other entrance and confronted the guard there, forcing him at gunpoint into the lobby. It was the night auditor's habit to leave the vault door open while he worked. Nothing stood between the crooks and the safety boxes. They subdued 14 people in 15 minutes.
So they round up everybody, handcuff them, tape their mouths, tape their eyes. There were only 1 or 2 people who even was able to see the faces of these people, much less identify them.
The robbers usually broke in and moved out within an hour, but at the Pierre, progress was hampered by the number of boxes. The men knew a treasure lay within these walls, but they didn't know which of the boxes held it. The first ones they broke open were disappointing. They didn't have the time to go through all 200. Soon the lobby would be filled with guests, jeopardizing their meticulous plan.
Everything had to be precise. The timing had to be exact. And they hoped that nothing would come, interfere with that. The people coming in and out of the hotel, even at night, or that time of the morning, you'll have people going and walking their dog.
Let's try this one. That one was good up there.
Look, we need to know who owns the boxes.
Keep going down. Keep going.
In desperation, one of the robbers grabbed the night auditor.
Do it! My eye on you. Go! Go!
He forced him to turn over the list of box holders.
I want to know who owns the boxes. Where are the cards? What's taking so long?
For the thieves, it was the treasure map they needed.
Give them to me. Turn around, don't look at me.
The list put them back on track.
2108.
Do it.
Hold on. 2108.
They chose the boxes of the most prominent guests and tenants.
118.
Oh, yeah.
62. 206.
Oh, come here. What's that?
Just before 5 a.m., the men were alarmed by the sound of the front desk phone. All activity stopped. Ignoring it would arouse suspicion. One of the gang picked it up. The call was from inside the building. A guest had been calling for the elevator, but it hadn't shown up. She didn't know that the elevator operator was being held hostage 37 floors below. To preserve the illusion of normality, one of the men went to get the guest. 3 more people became hostages, bringing the total to 19.
Even when some things happened, they reacted appropriately and dissipated what could have been, the end of the heist.
Get it. Get it.
All right, fine.
Got it. Go. Come on.
The men had cracked only 47 of the 200 boxes,
Do it. Come on.
but they had almost more than they could carry,
Good. Come on.
and much more than they imagined.
There. All right, look. That's enough. There's nothing in there. That's enough. Let's go.
Come on.
All right.
Come on.
Go.
One safety box alone contained $800,000 in cash and jewels.
Go.
But dawn was breaking, and New York would soon be waking up. The thieves instructed the hostages not to move, and then threatened to find and kill anyone who identified them to police.
And so they go out the same way they came in. They carry their bags, they've got everybody taped up, and they go, and the limousine is there. And they just go out just in their duds and get in the car and they drive off.
As soon as one of the hostages was certain the coast was clear, he tripped the alarm. But it was too late. The crooks were gone without a trace. Detectives found it difficult to appraise the theft. Many of the box holders were spending the winter abroad, and only they knew the value of the stolen goods. It would take time to track them down. Tracking the culprits would be even more difficult. Within 2 days of the robbery, a conservative estimate of the damage was made.
In the early reports, the papers had come out with $1 million and $4 million that they estimated $4 million. But we never got a true figure from the people. We estimate over $10 million.
25 officers were assigned to the case, but the public wasn't sympathetic to the plight of the Pierre. They felt that nobody got hurt but some rich people, and police were being diverted from fighting more serious crimes in the city. The authorities didn't see it that way.
The police commissioner and I figured out what we wanted to tell the public, and we announced that, look, these people have knocked over a great many hotels. You can't leave them out there. Nobody got killed, but the next time somebody might. There were guns. This was armed robbery. This was a terrible crime.
Investigators knew that the cash would probably never be recovered. But millions of dollars in jewels would need to be fenced. That many gems was bound to draw attention. First, they'd have to be pried from their settings to make them untraceable. Then they must be exchanged for cash. The robbers would have to find someone with connections, someone who didn't ask a lot of questions.
You never use the same fence, because if you use the same fence, eventually it's going to come a time where he sees that you're going to come to him after every hotel job, every time that a hotel in New York gets hit, there you are with a bunch of stones. He'll be very suspicious. Then he could turn around and either give you in for a reward to the FBI or to whoever, maybe the people that they stole them from.
It was almost the perfect crime, but now the thieves' luck would begin to turn. In order to separate themselves from the heist, they hired someone else to fence the jewels for them, a man named Dom Paulino. Paulino contacted a broker named Bert Stern, saying he had a large amount of jewels and some negotiable bank securities to sell. Stern told his partner, who was secretly a paid FBI informant. As a gesture of good faith, the informant purchased some of the securities. The FBI traced them back to the Pierre heist.
The entire investigation begins with Stern contacting the informant saying, I am one of the people who was involved in that robbery. I can fence you all of the jewels that were stolen there.
On January 7th, 5 days after the heist, the informant set up a meeting to purchase some of the jewels. Paulino and his gem broker Bert Stern went to the Summit Hotel to have a sample of the gems appraised by an independent jeweler. Paulino told the jeweler that this was just a sample of what was to come.
That's just a sample of what we got.
Stern, satisfied with what he saw, left the two men to take care of business. Because the informant had arranged for the hotel room and paid for it with FBI money, federal agents didn't need a warrant.
FBI, you're under arrest!
The FBI nabbed Paulino and the jeweler in the room, while Stern was arrested downstairs. But the men held only $250,000 worth of gems. Millions were still missing. Police knew that more people were involved. A receipt in Paulino's pocket led them to their next suspect, Bobby Comfort. Comfort, age 39, had a history of robbery and other offenses stretching back 20 years. Most of it was minor. It was a good bet that he was the mysterious Bobby from Rochester, but authorities had no way to connect him to anything as big as the New York City hotel heists, until now. As soon as authorities caught up with him, he began to taunt the police, in the process incriminating himself and naming his partner.
They got him. Comfort starts talking about, you'll never get Sammy.
But detectives were on to Sammy the Arab, who had a half-dozen aliases and no fixed address. A tip led to a woman who had been to his place in the Bronx. She didn't know the address, but she knew what the building looked like.
And she had, after a few hours of driving around the Bronx, we found the apartment.
And they found Sammy just as he was leaving.
Hey, that's it, look.
Sammy, whose real name was Sorecho Nelo, was a career criminal. He was suspected of being involved in a murder 18 months earlier, but was never charged. He wasn't so lucky this time. Police found him disposing of the incriminating evidence in an alley. It was enough to obtain a warrant to search Nelo's apartment. There, police found a gold scale, a black wig, almost $6,000 in cash, Nelo's passport, and a half-packed suitcase. In his jacket pocket were jewelry settings. What was conspicuously absent were the $10 million worth of cash and gems. Nelo was taken into custody. All of the suspects were charged with possession of stolen property. But authorities didn't believe that Paulino, Stern, or the jeweler took part in the actual theft. Things were sorted out
That's him.
in a lineup. A hostage recognized Nelo and Comfort, who were then charged with robbery. But where were the jewels? The question would be answered 2 days later, when FBI agents in Detroit got a call.
The fellow in Detroit went to the FBI, hearing and seeing the newspapers that about this great robbery that was committed in New York at the Hotel Pierre. He knew what he had because he was given a bundle to hold for Sammy. It must have been for a rainy day.
Authorities had now recovered $1 million worth of the stolen jewels. They estimated that that was only 10% of what was still out there. Also out there were 2 other accomplices. Sammy Nelo and Bobby Comfort refused to reveal the names of the other men who helped rob the Pierre that night. They feared reprisals against their families. That wasn't the only problem.
The FBI refused to identify their informant. They also refused to identify the agent who controlled the informant. And as a result, no strong case could be made against these guys, these suspects, these robbers.
Without the informant's testimony, the prosecution couldn't legally justify the raid on the Summit hotel room and the evidence collected there. The district attorney had to face the grim possibility that the culprits might walk away scot-free. Based on the evidence the prosecution could use, Paulino, Stern, and the jeweler were convicted of criminal possession of stolen property. Nelo and Comfort, who could have received 25 years, were sentenced to 7 years each for second-degree robbery and related charges. The sentence was later reduced to 4 years. Comfort ended up serving 2.5.
The biggest haul that they had, of all the hotels that they hit and the people that they hit, the Hotel Pierre was their downfall.
14 years after the Pierre heist in 1986, Bobby Comfort died. He was 53. Shortly after Nelo's release, he was arrested for robbing a jewelry store and was back in prison. The remainder of the Pierre cash and jewels have never been recovered. There are no more leads. To stop a speeding train in its tracks, and make off with millions. The planning had to be perfect. It became the crime by which all others would be measured. In the early morning hours of August 8, 1963, a Royal Mail train made its run from Glasgow to London. Fireman David Whitby and engineer Jack Mills traveled this route nightly. Postal workers routinely sorted and organized the mail during the run. Although it wasn't public knowledge, sometimes these trains also carried huge deposits from outlying banks. This particular consignment was especially large because of the August bank holiday. Security was light, and why not? Trains on this line had made this trip for years without incident. But a daring gang of thieves was about to change all that. The plan was ingenious. They chose a desolate stretch of track 2 hours outside London and cut all communication with the outside world. Stopping a train traveling at 70 miles an hour was their biggest challenge. Using battery power, they made the red light burn twice as bright as usual. Then the gang waited. Upon seeing the red signal light, engineer Jack Mills quickly stopped the train. Mills sent his fireman David Whitby to the trackside telephone to find out what was going on. Whitby had made this run numerous times without mishap. So even when he found the cut wires, he didn't immediately anticipate the danger that awaited him. Until it was too late. Whitby was told if he shouted, they would kill him. The thieves made certain Engineer Mills would cooperate. Occasionally, the train did stop during its run, so none of the postal workers inside suspected anything.
Put your hands up!
Every detail of the robbery had been planned with military precision. While some of the gang members secured the engine, others were assigned to separate the first car from the rest of the train. This was the high-value coach and contained what the thieves were looking for. A mile down the track, Mills was ordered to stop the train where the other gang members were waiting. They didn't waste any time. The postal workers inside were caught completely off guard. Before they could even comprehend what was happening, the thieves had broken into the coach. The gang then brought the postal workers forward to the engine compartment and handcuffed them along with Mills and Whitby, who were already secured. They were about to make off with the biggest haul ever taken from a British railroad. over $7.3 million.
It was a brilliant crime because of the planning, because of the business of stopping the train at one point, cutting off the guard, take away the engine and two carriages. It was superbly planned.
It took the thieves only 15 minutes to completely empty the contents of the high-value coach. 124 sacks filled with money en route from northern banks to their London counterparts. Then, the thieves drove off in Land Rovers painted like military vehicles, hoping that anyone who saw them would believe they were soldiers on nighttime maneuvers. The robbery had gone according to plan. Now, their escape would have to be just as masterfully executed if they were to stay ahead of the law. Down the track, a signalman wondered why the engine had been uncoupled. Running to the scene of the crime, he quickly got his answer. Engineer Mills immediately sent him to get help. The gang had planned the heist to take place in a remote location. The nearest farmhouse was over 30 minutes away by foot. The delay gave the gang time to escape.
Now, they've got their VHF open, listening for police transmissions, and there's nothing, not a sign of anything. And they think, they've blanked it, they put a silence on, and suddenly they hear the police come in, and they hear the wonderful message,
"Not gonna believe this, but they've stolen a train."
"You'll never believe this, they've just stolen a train."
A 30-minute head start was all they needed. At an abandoned farm called Leatherslade, they planned to lie low until the search cooled. Racing against the dawn, they unloaded the money into the house and hid the Land Rovers in buildings out back.
A professional robber, a professional thief, has three great rewards. There's the intellectual reward, planning, working out how to do it. They have minds and they like using them. There's the adrenaline rush of going in. Now we're doing it. Now we're breaking into somebody's property. Now we're going for it. And there's the gambler's thrill of what have we got? How much have we got? Now for the train robbery, you have expert and brilliant planning. You have the excitement of a 50-minute drive through back lanes, waiting for the train. It's come, we're in, we've got it. And then when they get back, was there as much money as they hoped? £2.5 million in used notes, more than anybody's ever had before. They got the rewards.
The gang consisted of experienced members from London's underworld, but even these cagey thieves were in awe of the amount they had taken. It took an entire day to count and divvy up the score. Each man would walk away with the hefty sum of £150,000, over $750,000 in today's dollars. One man, Ronald Biggs, could hardly believe his luck. He was a petty crook, but had managed to use his charm and charisma to make connections with more accomplished criminals. He had met Bruce Reynolds, the gang's ringleader, in prison. When Reynolds realized Biggs had a connection at the railroad, it was a match made in heaven.
The English people and press couldn't believe it. Train robbery, that was Jesse James, that was America 100 years ago. This doesn't happen. And the amount, it was a sensation.
The local police and Scotland Yard detectives immediately came to the scene of the crime. The police scoured the scene for clues, and they quickly ascertained that the bandits were no amateurs. They had not only succeeded in stopping a train, they had also vanished without a clue.
At the train, the robbers made one mistake. They shouted to the postal workers, "Don't move for half an hour, we've got someone watching you." Now, the police had nothing to go on except this shout. And Superintendent MacArthur said, "Wait a minute, that may mean there's somewhere which is half an hour's distance away. Draw a radius of 30 miles round the bridge, and let's search every farm in that radius."
Detective Jack Slipper, part of the team assigned to the case, remembers how that simple clue focused the initial search.
Well, that became very important to us because the senior people at the yard, when they'd been called in, realised that they couldn't have got back to London in 20 minutes.
Scotland Yard enlisted local law enforcement and the army to conduct the search of the surrounding countryside. Local citizens were stopped and asked if they had seen anything that evening. The plan was to lie low for at least 4 days at the farm. Each man took a turn at keeping watch, and they carefully monitored the police radio to follow the progress of the search.
When they heard over the radio that the army were being called in to search every building in a radius of 20 or 25 miles, all the barns and outhouses and everything, some of them panicked.
The robbers decided to move out immediately. They slipped away a few at a time so as not to raise suspicion. Scotland Yard detectives knew time was of the essence. They had to find the gang before they left the country. They sent plainclothesmen to scour the underworld for any tips. And they also continued to focus on the surrounding countryside where the crime took place. Surely someone saw something that night. But the gang members had slipped through their fingers, making it back to London and concealing themselves in the city.
Of Detective Superintendent MacArthur, today has been a working day.
At Scotland Yard, telephone back to Hi,
Daddy. Ronald Biggs was one of the gang members who headed back to London. After the heist, he simply returned to his family, went back to his job as a carpenter, and acted as if nothing had happened.
Biggs was a known ex-criminal in London at the time of the Great Train Robbery. He had a lot of form, but he hadn't actually committed any crimes for 4 years. He was setting himself up reasonably successfully as a builder, but he did need more capital to keep his business going.
Biggs now had all the money he had ever dreamed of, and then some, but spending it would tip off the police. Turning to his connections in the underworld, Biggs split up his take and gave it to friends for safekeeping. 5 days after the robbery, a neighboring farmer became suspicious when he noticed black curtains in the windows of the farmhouse. Upon closer inspection, he found one of the Land Rovers. He knew the farm had been uninhabited for some time, so he immediately contacted the police. The thieves had planned to have an associate clean the hideout and remove any evidence that would implicate them. But before he could get there, the police were scouring the property for clues.
The fingerprint experts went in and covered everything. And then they found fingerprints on the ketchup bottle, fingerprints on the saucers of milk put out for the cat, fingerprints on the Monopoly money, fingerprints on the salt cellar, fingerprints on one of the wrappers that the banknotes had been in.
They also found empty mailbags in a hole in the front yard, but only 684 pounds sterling in very used notes were recovered. The police had secured an abundance of evidence. It would take time to analyze the fingerprints and match them to known criminals. Attempting to sequester their money, two of the thieves hid their stash in a truck and traveled outside London to find a garage for rent.
We've got all the money up front.
They offered the landlady 3 months cash in advance.
And all up front, if you like.
I see.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
While the men were still there, she phoned the police. The robbers had unluckily called upon a policeman's widow. She was instantly suspicious when the men pulled out the large amount of cash. When the police asked them for identification, the men fled. The officers inspected the truck and found over £140,000 in banknotes. In London, Ronald Biggs kept his eye on the news, but it didn't faze him that their hideout had been discovered. He was confident that he had left nothing behind that could link him to the crime. At Scotland Yard, after weeks of poring over the evidence, detectives were narrowing their list of suspects. When they examined the fingerprints from the Leatherslade farm, they discovered that the prints matched several ex-cons in and around London. One of them was Ronald Biggs.
Scotland Yard traced Ronald Biggs because he'd left a fingerprint on a ketchup bottle.
They quickly descended upon his apartment, but Biggs wasn't at home. His wife attempted to reach him at work, but police feared that she would tip him off. The wily Biggs had so far managed to elude Scotland Yard, but now they were about to catch up to him. When Ronald Biggs got home from work that evening, he was surprised to find Scotland Yard detectives waiting for him at his flat. With each day that had passed since the robbery, he had grown more confident that he was in the clear. The police tried to get Biggs to implicate other gang members, but he refused. However, the evidence collected at Leatherslade Farm was enough for police to arrest the majority of the gang members. Charles Wilson's fingerprints were found at the farm, and he was arrested. James Hussey's prints were also found, and he was brought up on charges for buying the getaway vehicles. Prints implicated Roy the Weasel James, and after a dramatic rooftop chase, he was arrested. John Wheater, a solicitor who had helped the gang find and use Leatherslade Farm, was arrested for conspiracy, as was Leonard Field, who had pretended to be interested in purchasing the farm. A German hotel bill found in one stash of confiscated money led to the arrest of Brian Field. 14 people were rounded up in the initial sweep, but police were only able to recover $300,000 of the £2.5 million stolen. Fingerprints on the Monopoly set implicated Bruce Reynolds, yet he proved to be one of the most difficult to arrest. The man who had masterfully planned the Great Train Robbery had also set up an elaborate escape. Using a false passport, he left England for France and vanished. England was captivated by the Great Train Robbery. For weeks, the arrests and the trials were all over the news. The gang had become media sensations, but when the sentences were handed down, people were stunned.
I don't think most people were upset that the train robbers were caught. That was exciting. It kept the story going. We learnt more about it. What the English people were upset about were the sentences. 30-year sentences. This was more than you would get for rape and murder. And that really outraged a lot of people.
Ronald Biggs was sentenced to 30 years, but that wasn't the end of his story. He wasn't about to spend the rest of his life in jail.
We say it was the most audacious crime of the century, this train robbery. But also, involved in the train robbery sometime afterwards was another audacious crime, and that was the most daring escape of all.
After his conviction, Biggs was sent to Wandsworth Prison, where he was classified a special watch prisoner. 2 guards sat outside his cell at all times, but this did not deter his plan for escape. He had recruited a fellow inmate, Paul Seaborn, who was about to be released. Seaborn would use the train robbery money to make arrangements on the outside. Because Biggs was about to be transferred to a high-security prison, they would have to act quickly. The prisoners were randomly assigned to exercise periods in an effort to thwart any plans for escape. Biggs enlisted the help of 2 fellow convicts, and when they were finally all together in the yard, the plan was on. The prisoners were an effective decoy, allowing Biggs to make it over the wall. Like the robbery, the escape relied on shrewd planning and split-second timing. After only a year and a half in prison, Biggs was a free man again. Using proceeds from the robbery, he went to Paris and had plastic surgery. Under the cover of a new identity, Biggs disappeared. Only a few years later, Bruce Reynolds' luck ran out. 5 years after the robbery, Scotland Yard had finally snared the gang's ringleader. Now the focus was on Biggs. The manhunt led them to Australia. Scotland Yard spent months chasing leads, but Biggs kept one step ahead of the law. Persuading a friend to lend him his passport, Biggs traveled to Brazil. Biggs lived in Rio de Janeiro under an assumed name for 4 years. The money from the robbery now spent, he needed to cash in on his exploits. He persuaded the Daily Express, a British newspaper, to buy his incredible story. The brazen Biggs now, in essence, was soliciting all of England to fund his life on the lam.
Jack Slipper learnt from a journalist called Mackenzie, or through a journalist called Mackenzie who was writing a life of Ronald Biggs, that Biggs was now in Rio. He went out with a warrant for his arrest.
Slipper left for Brazil to bring back the man who had eluded authorities for 9 years.
He kept observation on that hotel for many hours, and at 12 o'clock, or just after 12 on Friday, I saw Biggs enter the hotel.
Slipper arrested Biggs at the Hotel Trocadero and was about to take him back to England when Biggs found a way to stop him.
His girlfriend Raimunda, who was an exotic dancer, rather an exotic figure, announced that she was pregnant. Brazil has a law that the parent of a Brazilian citizen may not be extradited. They must stay and try and support their child.
Slipper returned to England empty-handed. Once again, Biggs had evaded capture. For Biggs, his years in hiding were over. He was now officially protected by the Brazilian government. The petty crook, now considered a folk hero, became one of Rio's tourist attractions. In 1993, retired Chief Superintendent Slipper, the man who had tried to bring him to justice, was reunited with Biggs in a media event staged by the Daily Express.
Biggs will never come back on his own steam. He's got 28 years prison still outstanding, and at his age, he's now 69. If he does come back on his own steam, there's only one place for him, that's Wandsworth Prison.
While Ronald Biggs eluded authorities, most of the gang paid dearly for this crime of the century. The majority served 10 years hard time before making parole. The great train robbery, though cunning in its conception and daring in its execution, ended in disaster for nearly everyone involved. Beach bums by day, felons by night. 2 surfers get in over their heads when they steal the most famous star sapphire in the world. warm summer evening in 1964, actress Ava Gabor and her husband Richard Brown were returning to their hotel in New York City when they ran into some trouble.
No, I think they're new to the area. Photo right there.
Brown unmasked one of the robbers.
Put your hands down. Back up. Come here.
But after a brief glimpse of the man's face, found himself staring down the barrel of a gun.
Hurry it up. You watch, come on. Stop moving.
The couple did as they were told, and the thieves made off with a staggering $50,000 in jewels.
Do you recognize anybody in here?
The NYPD asked the couple to go through some mugshots.
Pretty scary for you.
None of the faces looked familiar, and for good reason. The assailants were not from New York. They were from Miami, Florida. In appearance, Alan Kuhn and his friend, Jack Murphy, a.k.a. Murph the Surf, were professional beach bums. They spent most of their time surfing and worked part-time jobs as cabana boys. But their lifestyle suggested another source of income. 26-year-old Kuhn had recently paid cash for a new Cadillac convertible. He also owned a yacht and an upscale condominium on Biscayne Bay. He and his 27-year-old partner, Murphy, had a reputation for being con men, using their charm and good looks to take advantage of wealthy female tourists. The authorities suspected the two playboys were involved in several crimes, but lacked the evidence needed to arrest them. Miami police kept the men under surveillance, waiting for them to slip up.
They were a different brand of wild and crazy guy. They liked the wild lifestyle that they lived, and I think being thieves and engaging in these daring crimes was part of their own kind of mystique about themselves.
In October, they returned to New York in search of another score. Their first stop was the Cambridge Hotel, where they joined their friend and crime partner, Roger Clark.
Trip okay? Come on in. I'll be right in.
Clark was a fellow beach bum who had left Miami weeks earlier. He had rented a 3-bedroom suite at the Cambridge to serve as their base of operations.
Your name? Josh. Thanks.
The men hit the town every night, and after making a scene of all the hot spots, the party continued back at the hotel. But their days were spent enjoying more cultural pursuits, such as strolling through the American Museum of Natural History. They were typical tourists, except in one regard. They returned to the museum day after day, always to the 4th floor and the J.P. Morgan Hall of Gems and Minerals, home to one of the most spectacular collections of gemstones in existence. The centerpiece of the exhibit was the fabulous Star of India.
It weighs over 500 carats. It has a very, very fine star, and it's monstrous in the world of phenomenal gemstones. Something over 500 carats is extraordinarily large.
Security in the gem hall seemed surprisingly lax. Neither the display cases nor the windows showed any sign of being connected to an alarm. The men also visited areas of the museum most patrons never saw, such as the 5th floor offices of the museum's staff. Kuhn studied the museum's layout. He read up on the gem collection from a book he acquired from the gift shop. While the all-night parties continued in their suite, he formulated his plan. On the evening of October 29th, 1964, Coon, Murphy, and Clark put the plan into action. Taking care to avoid the museum's small force of security guards, they broke into a side door. They made their way to the 5th floor and entered one of the offices. They were directly above the Hall of Gems. Although the interior entrance to the Hall of Gems was secured by a locked iron gate, the windows were left open a few inches for ventilation. Getting in was no problem. The burglary was going as planned. The men were safely inside, and no alarms had sounded. Outside, Clark kept an anxious watch, while Coon and Murphy prepared to make the greatest score of their lives. Only a thin pane of glass stood between the thieves and their prize.
Murph, I got it.
When Coon lifted up the Star of India sapphire, he saw it was resting on an alarm sensor. They resorted to Plan B. Hours had passed, and Roger Clark feared his friends had been caught. Just as he was about to give up on them, the thieves appeared. They quickly made their getaway. No one responded to the alarm. The next morning, Kuhn and Murphy headed to JFK International Airport and took an early flight to Miami. So did Kuhn's new girlfriend, 19-year-old Janet Flakowitz, but she was traveling alone. Kuhn had told her to pretend not to know him and had given her a briefcase with strict instructions not to look inside. Roger Clark also left the city, bound for his parents' house in Connecticut.
Hello, Mr. Clark. Hey,
Before the burglary was discovered, the thieves were long gone. Later that morning, a custodian was opening the fourth-floor galleries when his routine was broken. The authorities descended on the museum, with the press only moments behind. Detectives combed the hall for physical evidence, but thousands of visitors passed through the museum each day, and any fingerprints they found would be of little use. 24 gems were missing, including 3 irreplaceable jewels: the DeLong ruby, the Midnight Star sapphire, and the Star of India. The enormity of the theft was shocking, as was the ease with which it had been accomplished. The curator had personally armed the security system the night before, and the removal of the stone should have tripped it.
As we visited the scene after the commission of the burglary, of course the first thing we asked was about the alarm system. And I took a look at the wires and touched them, and the wires came away in my hands as dust.
It was clear to Assistant DA Maurice Nadjari that the security system hadn't been maintained for years.
Now, all they had to do was break the glass, and they had it. And they were gone, without a trace.
By afternoon, the sensational robbery had made national news.
Let's look at national headlines. The top story in Tri-State News: the burglary of New York's American Museum of Natural History. More than 20 gems were taken by the thief or thieves. New York City police have no suspects and no leads at this time. In Brooklyn last night, an apartment fire caused extensive damage in the Flatbush neighborhood. And the Yankees wrapped up their homestand last night with an 8-4 loss.
Back on their home turf in Miami, Kuhn and Murphy took part of their haul to one of their usual receivers. The small, unrecognizable stones could be easily fenced, but the Star of India would be much more difficult.
This was a famous gemstone, and more famous because it was in the museum's collection, and certainly was not easy to simply offer for sale on the open market. Who would have bought such a thing?
Later that afternoon, in New York, police got their first real lead.
An informer spoke to a vice cop. And the informer said, you know, I read about the museum burglary, and I don't know whether the information I have will be of any value to you, but I went to a party last night, and I heard them talking about Miami, New York, a big heist. When I walked into the bedroom, I saw a blueprint of the American Museum of Natural History.
You did a great job.
Little did the officer know that his $2 thank you to the bellhop would crack open a multi-million-dollar case. The room was registered to Alan Kuhn, Jack Murphy, and Roger Clark. Running a check on the names, authorities discovered their criminal pasts and obtained a search warrant.
You check those out, I think.
Inside the hotel room, detectives found plenty of evidence that they had the right men, including glass cutters, a crowbar, and other burglary tools. There was broken glass embedded in the sole of a shoe. They also found the gem book on the mortgage collection with the museum brochure and snapshots tucked between the pages.
Interesting information.
The men hadn't cleaned up, and they hadn't checked out, so the detectives settled in and waited.
We just need to make sure that we continue going through everything.
When Roger Clark returned later that evening, he walked right into their trap.
They immediately placed Clark under arrest. After some persuasion, Clark finally told the entire story of what happened.
One day after the robbery, the first suspect was in custody. But there was no sign of the jewels. Back at the condo on Biscayne Bay, Murph the Surf and Alan Kuhn were laying low when they had some unexpected visitors.
Who's that?
The FBI, acting in cooperation with the New York police, arrested Kuhn and Murphy in Miami, 2 days after the theft of the Star of India.
Let's go. Back up. Back up. It's all right, girls. Don't move.
The men were extradited back to New York to face charges. But the jewels were still nowhere to be found.
So, Murphy, what brought you into New York City?
Here, these guys came up from Florida. They were arraigned. They looked like each of them had $1 million in the bank. They were high style, well tanned, good looking, well spoken, and nothing in the world was going to break these guys. By this time, Clark had recanted. So really, we had a rather weak case.
Kuhn and Murphy flatly denied any involvement in the crime. Without Clark's testimony to contradict them, Assistant DA Najari needed another angle.
So you're telling me
he went after the courier,
months. You were his girlfriend.
Janet
You didn't know about
Flakowitz.
this heist that he's planning? The biggest heist this country
At first, she claimed ignorance. But under intense interrogation, the 19-year-old broke down and admitted she'd peeked into the briefcase.
Folks. They're not. They're evil people. They've got criminal records.
She told me the entire story, that she had seen it, seen the gems, she knew they were the gems from the museum, and implicated the defendants very, very well.
Najari took the case into the judge and requested high bail.
We argued and argued and argued that these men would fly, that they were a danger to the community, and nothing would cut any ice. Low bail, $2,500.
Kuhn, Murphy, and Clark easily made bail and were released. Then came another blow, as Flakowitz, claiming she'd been bullied by her interrogators, went back on her story. Najari's case was falling apart. Upon their release, the press treated the three criminals like celebrities. They reveled in the attention and continued to proclaim their innocence. Najari decided to try a new approach.
My feeling was that these free spirits would never break. And probably I didn't stand much of a chance on trial. They would never break unless I could zap them of their freedom. And I went through all of the violent robbery files. And I came up with two that seemed to follow the pattern and seemed to fit the description of these three guys. One of them was the robbery of Eva Gabor, the actress.
Najari brought Eva Gabor to New York City, and she positively identified her assailants as Jack Murphy and Alan Kuhn. The men were arrested again, and this time the bail was set at $250,000 apiece, a sum impossible for the thieves to raise. Faced with the prospect of hard time on Rikers Island, Kuhn decided to cut a deal. In return for a 1-year sentence for each of them, he would help recover the jewels. But the judge refused to release Kuhn without bail. Najari took matters into his own hands before the Star was lost forever.
He had promised us that he would get the gems overnight. Take me to Florida tonight. I'll get the gems for you tonight. We'll be back in New York tomorrow. And so I told the detectives that we're going to kidnap the guy.
In the custody of Assistant DA Najari, and New York detective Richard Moline, Kuhn flew south to make good on his promise.
Hey, it's Alan.
Upon their arrival, Kuhn was recognized, and news spread that he was back in Miami. Reporters soon began to gather outside their hotel.
Hey, it's Kuhn.
With all of the media attention, none of Kuhn's contacts were willing to talk to him. Recovering the gems overnight would be impossible. Najari had some explaining to do.
I called the district attorney, Frank Hogan, my boss, told him what I had done, thinking I better cover myself somehow. He said, well, Maury, I'll tell you what. If you recover the gems, come back. If you don't, go south to Argentina. I don't want to see you because I won't defend you for kidnapping. So find them or never come back to New York.
Kuhn enjoyed all the commotion, making the most of the attention while it lasted. He knew the moment he found the jewels, he'd have to trade the Miami sunshine for a New York City jet set. To Kuhn's delight and Najari's chagrin, the quest for the gems was front-page news.
Not that I know of.
Najari kept the pressure on, threatening to return Kuhn to prison with or without the gems.
Look at that. Stars.
Recovering them was the jewel thief's only chance for a deal.
Kuhn kept making phone calls. We kept changing motels because we kept getting spotted by people. We must have been in 4 or 5 different motels.
After 4 days, a retired Miami jeweler named Hy Gordon came forward and agreed to act as a go-between. Following instructions from an anonymous source, Gordon and Detective Moline drove to an all-night coffee shop. Once there, they were to wait inside for half an hour, leaving their car unlocked. When they returned to the car, a note and a key were waiting for them. The note led Detective Moline to the Miami bus terminal. If the jeweler's tip paid off, he'd find $500,000 in jewels stashed in a 25-cent locker. There, along with 8 other gems, including the Midnight Star, the detective recovered the Star of India.
The Assistant District Attorney Najari, my office, went to Florida, and they have been engaged in an effort to recover jewels stolen on October 29th from the American Museum of Natural History. They returned this morning with 9 of the 24 jewels have been stolen.
We did not recover the DeLong ruby. That was not amongst them. There was a second receiver who was holding on to that. We didn't get it. And I told Kuhn that we had recovered 9 gems, not 24, that there was no deal.
Because Kuhn was unable to hold up his end of the bargain, he, Clark, and Murph the Surf were each sentenced to 3 years on Rikers Island. The Star of India sapphire was put back on display in the museum under much tighter security. The DeLong Star ruby and 5 other stones were recovered a year later without the help of the thieves. 9 of the gems from the collection were never recovered. He was a high-rise cat burglar whose ambitions were loftier than most. Even a 30-story window was within his grasp, and he had authorities climbing the walls. He preyed on those who thought they were safe. He struck only the finest homes. He knew what he wanted and where to get it. That could be said of any cat burglar, but this man was different. He not only defied the law, he defied the law of gravity. He would climb 5 stories, 10 or more, to reach residents high above the ground. Without ropes, without a net, and without being noticed. Miami Beach, Florida may seem like paradise. But like any city, it has its share of crime. For the wealthy who live here, the balmy climate and high-rise vistas make the problems easy to overlook. The towering condos that dot these shores are like fortresses, equipped with video cameras, security guards, and state-of-the-art alarm systems. People living in these towers felt out of harm's reach. But then, a favorite necklace would turn up missing. A favorite brooch would disappear. Without any signs of a break-in, some victims suspected their housekeepers. On November 3rd, 1996, Miami Beach police began to learn the truth behind the thefts. Units on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors of a Collins Avenue condominium had been robbed the night before.
And as I started to look in the box...
Don't touch it. John, can you go ahead and... Excuse me.
The burglar had a sharp eye. He grabbed only cash and real gems,
Maybe we can...
leaving the costume jewelry behind.
I can dust it in a few minutes. Yeah, that'll be fine.
The victims admitted to
don't reach in.
detectives that they never locked their balcony doors.
I see we have jewelry left there, but that's costume jewelry.
Okay.
I went out to the balcony after not being able to find any forced entry to the doors, and at that time, I really went out to enjoy the view. It's pretty high up, and there's a beautiful water view.
Okay. Everything was fine until my wife noticed her.
And what I was able to see at the glass door is what we started to call the half-moon impression.
Hey, John, come out and look at this.
Where you would take your nose and smush your nose up against the glass to look in, and then put your hand up to cut the glare to look in.
It was a peculiar smudge to see outside of a 5th floor window. They found the same mark outside the other 2 units.
Right here. This way, so, okay, it looks like...
If the balcony was the point of entry, how did the burglar get there?
And after leaning out, I noticed scuff marks that were coming up the side of the wall.
You think he came from...
The burglar was a climber. Detectives checked the roof to see if he'd left any clues, but he apparently never made it that far.
We went up to the roof and we looked around. The scuff marks did not go that high. They were only below the 5th level, going in the downward direction.
Detectives were astonished to discover that the culprit had climbed up from the ground, spanning the 12-foot gaps between balconies. He had no drain pipe to shimmy up. There was no evidence he'd used ropes or a grappling hook. Miami Beach police weren't sure what they were dealing with. They had never seen anything like it before. They contacted other jurisdictions to see if similar burglaries had been reported.
I'll be clear from the 2200 scene.
2 weeks later, 50 miles away, a Palm Beach condo was robbed. Alerted by Miami police, investigators knew what to look for. The half-moon impression on the balcony door. The criminal's impeccable taste. And the scuff marks down the side of the building. The burglar hit 10 units in a single night. The MO was identical. The thief, whoever he was as methodical as he was agile.
He was able to pick the most expensive items, and he knew exactly where they were. He didn't have to do any ransack or any searching. No pillowcases were stolen to carry the jewelry out.
He had a system that worked. And with a range of 50 miles, the high-rise robber was going to be a challenge to catch.
We're going to enter that in.
Soon, similar break-ins were reported all over South Florida. In Fort Lauderdale, Ball Harbor, Boca Raton, and Cocoa Beach. Someone was scaling high-rises and making off with jewels.
9 o'clock tomorrow. Very good.
The robbers' range spread to a 300-mile radius.
Yes, task force tomorrow. We should have everything online.
This nightmare for law enforcement became a field day for journalists. Tessie Borden of the Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel knew a good story when she heard one. She was one of the many reporters intrigued with the burglar's prowess.
And had it not been for the kind of MO that he used, it would have been another burglary story, like a lot of them in South Florida. I mean, you just don't hear of burglars climbing up the sides of buildings. In his case, from what police say, he climbed as high as 30 stories at one point. I couldn't do that.
Along with millions in jewels, he stole the public's imagination. Though the police tried to downplay the story, this bigger-than-life villain soon earned a nickname.
The police were describing his MO, and I think at one point one of the reporters said, "Oh, you mean like Spiderman?" And the police said, "Yeah." And from then on, he was known as Spiderman.
Spiderman cast his web far and wide. It was only a matter of time until somebody spotted him. While South Florida police cast their dragnet, Spiderman conducted his business as usual. But one night, he was caught off guard. A man in Miami was the first to catch a glimpse of the notorious burglar. But just a glimpse. In a flash, Spiderman slipped down 8 stories and disappeared into the night. The witness saw enough to provide a composite sketch. Now, police knew to look for a muscular black male, 180 to 200 pounds, in his mid-20s to early 30s. Soon, other witnesses saw him too. They confirmed what investigators could hardly believe. He scaled the buildings without ropes or tools, relying totally on his own body strength. He climbed higher and higher, getting away with millions. The well-to-do, who paid a premium for the security of their luxury towers, found they weren't getting the protection they had paid for.
They were just in amazement that anybody could scale that high and come into their little corner of the world. People that live in the condos that we spoke to felt that because they lived high up, they had their own little security force, they felt that they were immune to the outside world violating them.
Spiderman had South Florida's undivided attention. Each caper became a media event.
I never, locked the sliding doors. I mean, 4th floor.
But that all changed after she became a victim of the now infamous Spiderman. Cleaned out of her jewelry last fall, police say Spiderman paid her condo a repeat visit just 3 weeks ago.
I'm still, I'm scared, living here. Everything is locked. I feel like I'm in jail living in my own place.
More than a year had passed since police first suspected a climber. Spiderman had struck dozens of buildings, but police were no closer to catching him. The break-ins were so clean, some victims didn't realize they were hit until long after.
There were several instances in which police didn't get the report of the theft until several weeks later, when the victims noticed that a particular piece of jewelry was missing. And they looked for it in their safe, they looked for it in their bank box, and they never found it. So then they reported it missing. By that time, it was probably already sold.
How you doing? Is the manager in? Thank you. How you doing, sir? Yeah.
Police visited several pawn shops and jewelry stores, but did not find any of the stolen jewelry. Spiderman was becoming as mythical and mysterious as his comic book namesake.
How you doing today?
He appeared to be unstoppable.
We're looking for some jewelry.
As Spiderman's trail grew cold, the public's interest in the thefts heated up.
Last week, Spiderman has struck again in Miami, hitting apartments in this Coconut Grove building and this building in Brickell. At this Brickell Avenue high-rise, Spiderman started off easy enough, scaling the walls to a 3rd-floor balcony, then going 1 floor up to apartment 402, then 7 stories higher to the 11th floor.
By early 1998, police sought a pattern to the Spiderman's capers. They reviewed every case report and re-interviewed the victims, hoping to find something they may have overlooked. They discovered that Spiderman had stolen something more than jewels and cash.
How about the credit cards?
The credit cards! Oh yes, the credit cards!
Detectives interviewed 40 to 50 of the Spiderman's victims and learned that besides their cash and jewels, many had taken another hit. He had stolen their credit cards. They didn't realize it until a month or 2 later when they received their bills. At that point, they contacted their credit card companies, but not the police.
There's nothing they're going to do about it.
Credit card transactions are easier to track than cash or jewels. Many of the purchases occurred at Villaman Tires. 7 charges totaling $10,000 had been made in a 2-week period. The proprietor remembered the transactions. The buyer, a black man, had ordered custom mag gold and silver rims for a green Ford Explorer. He returned on several occasions to purchase more tires and rims.
Okay, I can have. Can you give me like a printout or something?
Investigators hoped their efforts were about to pay off. Detectives combed the neighborhood looking for the green Explorer.
West Elliott 1, Lincoln Adam David Young, John, 101.
Finding no sign of the vehicle, they tried a different approach. The driver of the Explorer made several charges at a gas station in Miami Lakes. That's where Holman began spending his lunch hour.
After a month or so at sitting in Amico, it seemed a little bleak, but I still had hope. I said, eventually, this vehicle is going to roll in here.
Just sitting around here doing this.
Finally, a car matching the description pulled in to fill up. A black male was driving it. Holman thought he had found his Spider-Man. But his hopes were dashed in an instant.
Victor Tango Lima 261.
He was 6 foot tall, and he was just too big to do any type of climbing.
Even so, Holman decided to trail the explorer. They were led to a house in Oakland Park. Moments later, Holman's hunch was confirmed when a man matching the description of Spider-Man left the house. He drove off in another vehicle. Detectives followed. The driver stopped at 2 houses in a suburb of Dade County. When detectives called in the addresses, they learned that both belonged to a man named Derek James.
No traffic there. That's unnecessary.
A background check revealed that real estate wasn't his only passion. James had 18 felony convictions, including one in 1994 for stealing $25,000 worth of jewelry. In the 1994 arrest report, Detective Holman found what he was looking for.
In the officer's comments, he wrote that Derek James had paint transfer on his clothing as if he had laid or slid against a wall. So that was our first indication that he may in fact be a climber. We have apartments that are burglarized, we have jewelry that's taken, and the paint transfer really perked our interest.
The report suggested that Derek James may have been climbing at least since 1994, but he had been falling long before his arrest. In the 1980s, James had trained as an Army paratrooper and had made hundreds of jumps. He was no stranger to heights. Investigators had enough evidence on James to get a court order to put a tracking device on his SUV. They assembled a surveillance team to keep their eye on him. June 21st, 1998, Derek James was on the move. The surveillance team was trailing him, hoping to catch the Spiderman in action.
Headquarters, notify state police.
I've got him.
Where do you have him?
South on 32.
He headed down Brickell Avenue to the Bristol Towers, one of Miami's most exclusive condominium communities. It had been robbed before, so security at the towers was tight. The detectives waited for James to make his move. Then they lost him. They split up to cover more ground.
I can't see anything.
a security guard spotted Detective Hallman. Hallman offered his badge and asked him if he had seen anything suspicious.
Short guy. I've been out on my shift.
An hour had passed with no sign of James.
Nothing up here? No. It's nothing at all.
Detective Hallman returned to the front of the building just in time. James was getting away.
That's our guy, that's our guy. Let's go!
They called in the highway patrol.
528 dispatch.
James was pulled over for speeding. Police discovered he was driving with a suspended license and had violated his parole. But his troubles were just beginning. On the console was the evidence they needed.
Need anything?
One item, a bracelet, was engraved with the name of a Bristol Towers victim. Initially, Derek James was charged with 1 count each of grand theft and burglary. But even unmasked, the Spider-Man remained an intriguing character. Part of his mystique stemmed from the fact that he appeared so ordinary. He was never extravagant or flashy. His neighbors never suspected that he was a master cat burglar. He'd used his wealth to buy properties, which he kept well maintained. He was apparently a conscientious landlord. His audacious reputation was capped when the media revealed that his girlfriend was an ex-probation officer.
Just the way that he was able to walk around and buy all these properties, act like a real estate mogul, the way that he was even dating a probation officer was fascinating to me, because most of the time you would expect a burglar to try and stay away from people who are connected to law enforcement.
To make sure he appeared in court, Spider-Man's bail was set at $1 million. At a jailhouse news conference, James vehemently denied being the Spider-Man. He insisted he didn't have the physique for that kind of work. He said he won his wealth at the trial. With James in jail, the condominium burglaries stopped. Miami and all of southern Florida became a little less jittery. Peace returned to paradise. Spider-Man's trial lasted just over a week. A Miami jeweler sealed his fate when he testified that Derek James had sold him $8 million worth of jewelry over 4 years. On December 8, 1998, James was convicted of burglary and grand theft in the Bristol Towers case. He was sentenced to 30 years, 20 of them mandatory. Derek James still faces charges in Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach, Boca Raton, and Cocoa Beach, Florida. The tangled tale of Spider-Man is just beginning to unravel.